This book is about two things: travel and transformation. And I would say it's more heavily weighted toward transformation than travel. It's travel as a way of transforming. So,
Hmm.
you probably shouldn't read this book if you're only interested in travel. I can tell you that there have been people who read this book hoping it was just a travel book who were disappointed with it. And there have been people who read this book who had no interest in travel but really wanted to hear my perspective on personal transformation and still got a lot of value from the book, even if they hadn't traveled or had no desire to. They liked just the exploration of how travel can help you transform as a person. So that's why I'd say it's definitely more heavily weighted
Exploration.
toward transformation. And if you're a person who wants to read about personal transformation, this might be a good book, even if you don't have any specific interest in travel as the mechanism for doing that. This book is interesting for me to reflect on because I wrote this when I was 28. I'm 35 now, 7 years ago. And a lot has changed in my life since then. Um, and it's interesting for me to look back over this, of course, and like any writer, just seeing how I've evolved as a writer. Like it's it's a pretty well written book, I would say, but of course the way I write has changed a lot since then, so it's nice to reflect on that. But more importantly, the kinds of things am thinking about now are very different. So it's interesting to have a snapshot of
Hmm.
my mind when this was like the most prominent subject matter in my mind.
What are the main differences in what you're thinking about? That's what you said, right?
Yeah.
Between then and now.
Well, my lifestyle has changed quite a bit because I stopped traveling about 5 years ago, about 2 years after this book was written. And this book was all about how I'd spent my entire adult life, 10 years at this time, from 18 to 28, traveling, rarely staying in one place for more than a few months, right? 45 countries at the time this book
Air
was written,
nomad.
56 total now. So I've been to 11 more countries since this book was written.
Nice.
Yeah, and so the whole
Monk wouldn't like that, but nice.
Monk would hate that. So the whole point was to give a perspective of what it's like to be an adult who spent his entire adult life nomadically, how it changed my sense of identity, what I understood about myself, what I understood about the world, because even though travel is a fairly common and easy thing to do now, especially in the time since I wrote this book, very few people have the experience of spending their entire adult life doing that, right? Of course,
Hmm.
some people start traveling even when they're children because they have parents who travel with them. There are nomadic families or third culture kids now who grow up in many places. Some people get started even younger than I did, right? And so I was, very much espousing the benefits that come from that unconventional nomadic lifestyle. And since then, I've kind of experienced the opposite because I bought an old house in an Armenian village 5 years ago, moved into it, and have been refurbishing it and developing the property from the ground up, homesteading, basically in a place where I didn't even speak the language, had no connections, and it was incredibly difficult to get any kind of community or commerce happening. It was like being a pioneer in the truest sense. It probably the most that one can be in the modern age where there are no countries left to, to settle or colonize.
Hmm.
And basically establish a lifestyle and now the beginnings of a community from scratch by staying in one
The
place for
beatings of a
5 years.
community.
The beginnings of a community.
Ah,
Yeah, it's and
just
that
picturing them beating you.
that wasn't the plan at the start. I just bought it because it was an opportunity to get a house and a nice piece of land for cheap in a country where I already had citizenship through family descent and figured I'd probably return to at some point in the future. Instead, I kind of just embraced it and said, well, I can't think of anything else I'd rather be doing right now, even though I could go many places around the world. I just want to stay here and see where this takes me. That was 5 years ago. The house around me has transformed quite substantially, and also my paradigm has evolved quite a bit from the place I was in when I wrote Travel as Transformation, kind
Hmm.
of at the peak of my nomadic mindset. Now I've experienced the far opposite extreme, and so I've covered both
Have you
ends of the
thought
spectrum.
about doing a book about like shifting paradigms as such, so sort of meta to all your books which are about shifting a specific paradigm.
Well, in a way, everything I write about is about transformation or self-expression, which involves constant evolution of your paradigm based on new experiences, but around a core sense of who you are, not randomly or chaotically. I often think of that Carl Sagan quote from Cosmos that if we lived in a chaotic universe where things changed randomly, it would be impossible to predict or know anything. And if we lived in a completely rigid universe, nothing would ever change and evolution would be impossible, but we live in an in-between universe where things change all the time,
Now I'm
but
remembering the
according to
quote when you get
patterns,
to in
rules,
between.
or as we call them, laws of nature. I don't do a good Carl
That's a
Sagan
good one.
impression, but we don't change randomly. We change according to the principle of who we are that expands more and more with experience. So some
Within options, it's not we
right.
change in an exact way based on who we are. It's there's
We
a
unlock different
bunch of
aspects of
options.
ourselves, I think.
Yeah.
And some people believe both extremes. Some people believe that we don't change at all, like who we are is just fixed. I am this
How?
person. And some people believe that we're constantly changing randomly, chaotically, and who knows who will be tomorrow. So, just go with the flow and whatever. We're not responsible for anything we do. If you ever encounter a person who seems to abdicate all personal responsibility for their actions, who seems to adopt the mindset of like, well, that's just how I was feeling at the time and what I needed to do to be myself or something. It's usually women taking that approach. It's a very feminine, flowy approach to life, right? Not to denigrate all women, right? But that's a more feminine way to act. Men
And
have,
not to denigrate flow.
yeah, sure. Men have a different way of being pieces of shit than women in general, but that's a different
That's a good
conversation to get
line.
into. That's the type of person who probably has adopted a psychological, metaphysical position that there is no permanent sense of self, and we're always changing and just doing whatever feels right, so we can't be blamed for any choices we make because there's not
I
a
mean,
fundamental sense of self to them. That
what
commitments
exact
don't
that
matter
was
to them,
fun.
agreements don't matter to them, consistency doesn't matter to them. And then the
Mm.
opposite would be the more masculine rigidity of like refusing to change, even when it's obvious that you should have changed by now. It's been very interesting to dedicate myself to one place, even with all the
Mm.
options to leave, even though there have been lots of frustrations and different types of stressors and challenges that come with staying in one place. There are advantages and disadvantages to both approaches, the constant change and the rigidity, the solidity, the foundation. And honestly, for a while, it was such a big paradigm shift to go just from living out of a suitcase to accumulating stuff. Like that's the
Mm.
kind of course, most people live in houses or apartments and accumulate stuff. It's a normal thing to do for 99% of people. But you forget that there's a mindset and a skill set that comes with that. Like deciding what stuff to accumulate and how you're going to organize all the stuff you accumulate and remembering that you even own all the stuff you've accumulated and when you want to use it and and when you live out of a suitcase, you have everything you own with you at all times and there's a prioritization process to what kind of stuff you're going to own and bother to
Mm.
carry with you. Like
So did you like have as owned property almost nothing, or did you have a bunch of stuff like back home at
I
your
had some stuff at
parents or
my
whatever?
mother's house in California, but mostly everything I owned fit into one or two suitcases while I was traveling.
Damn.
Yeah, so it becomes prioritization. Do I need another t-shirt?
If
Am I gonna accumulate stuff that's really heavy to take
it
with me?
has link on it, then yes, you do.
Sure, unless I already have several of those. Maybe I don't need another then. And every traveler figures that out, right? Like everyone has their style of like, do I travel with a backpack? Do I travel with a carry-on thing? Everyone kind of, all the digital nomads kind of figure out the optimal way to travel with their travel
Mm.
gear. And I had my own way of doing it that I actually adapted really well to that lifestyle. Like I took to it really quickly. That's why I did it so successfully.
Damn.
And you forget like how much working memory and different parts of your brain it takes to like organize a house full of stuff or even just a room full of stuff. And so I would
Although you know the like meme about men, like there's a specific one I'm thinking of, but it's more general. Like, um, wife or something asks him for a paperclip, and he's like, "Yeah, there's one on the floor by
Next to my
the desk
desk.
in an
Yeah.
exact spot."
Yeah,
Like
I'm very
men
much
can
that
do
kind
that.
of guy. Yes. It seems disorganized, but I know where everything is. I have a sense of where everything.
Organized chaos or something.
Right.
You obviously know the expression variety is the spice of life, and it could be considered, oh, by settling down now you're going for like no variety or less. But to you, that's variety. That's a different thing from the, what was it, 10 or so years you spent traveling.
Yeah.
So for you, variety on a higher level is less variety on a lower level now,
It's
because you
different.
had a ton of
It's more
variety.
depth, less breadth, I would say.
Yeah,
Like, now the changes come to how I'm transforming the physical environment around me. First, the house went through a few years of refurbishment to make it all nice and modern. I could show pictures that showed how drastic the changes from when I bought the house to how it is now. We're focusing a lot more on the property around the house now, like a garden and terraforming certain areas and
ways
raising
of keeping
animals.
out bad dogs.
Fences. We're building an earth bag house behind my house now, so we're actually building a second house now. If you know what earth bag construction is, it's this alternative building
Think I
style.
saw pictures of that on your Facebook.
It's nylon
Bags.
sacks that you fill with dirt and stack like bricks to build walls. And
Is
it's
that an experiment to a significant extent, or are you
no,
already
it's a
convinced it's fine?
well-established building. I have several books on it. It's been happening for decades in some parts of the world, but I believe mine may be the first earth bag house in Armenia, which is kind of exciting to
Jesus.
think about. Like lots of people have noticed and started asking questions about this very strange but very cheap construction style because you barely need to pay for any materials, but it is a lot of labor. And so maybe we could, spread some interesting influence in this very underdeveloped country where honestly there are many opportunities for me to be the first person to do a thing. I'm kind of in that
Hmm.
mindset now. What can I be the first person
Especially
to do
since
in
it's
Armenia?
Armenia and Armenians.
They don't think creatively. They have a hard time experimenting, taking risks, trying new things, so maybe I can be the first person to do some other thing that I think of. I don't know. It's a bit like going back in time. Like, if you went back in time 100 years, even if you couldn't take any technology with you, you'd have a whole head full of ideas about what's possible to do that people 100 years ago wouldn't think of, right? That's kind of how I feel living here.
Are they more like that first group of people, the one who, so the second group was the no sense of self, the first group was the rigid sense of
Yeah.
self one. Are they like
They're
that?
they're very steeped in tradition and pride and victimization, rightfully so to a degree because their neighbors have been
They were
mean to them.
victims.
Yeah, there was a genocide, and even still the neighbors continue to oppress them. But the point is that they make that the center of their whole identity, and they pass it on to the children and insist over and over again, "You're an Armenian, you're a victim, and you gotta be a victim with us, or you're not a real Armenian." And that
Sounds like they need an
follows them.
identity breakthrough.
Yes, they do. They need a brand identity breakthrough in the most
That'll come
literal
after the
sense.
mind
That'll
identity breakthrough
Yeah.
myth.
We can talk about that more in our next talk about what exactly a brand identity is and how it goes beyond the realm of conventional business into how we perceive ourselves and our groups that we belong to. And the whole point, the subtitle of this book is Conquer the Limits of Culture to Discover Your Own Identity. And I did that by experiencing many
Based.
cultures based, not cringe. I experienced many different cultures in a short period of time that showed me how many different ways there are of living and seeing the world, and therefore all the choices I had for what kind of person I wanted to be. I didn't have to stay strictly aligned with any particular group's way of thinking. And that's the mentality I maintain here.
Oh yeah, your TEDx talk. See who you can be when the
Who are we when the
people.
world stops telling us who to be?
I think you must talk about this in the book. Let's talk about China.
Yeah, we do seem to talk about China a lot. And that is the chapter, that's chapter 5, Arriving at the Dark Night of the
Half.
Soul, that people mention to me most often. Because everything up to that point, that's about halfway through the book, I'm mostly describing like the positive, wondrous, life affirming aspects of travel, like how exciting it is, how much you learn, how many new things you experience. And then I talk about the dark side of travel. I talk about how if you really push yourself and not just go to popular tourist destinations where things are cheap and easy and lots of other people are there to help you support you, but you force yourself to live under circumstances that directly challenge you and force you to confront the opposite of everything you know to be true about yourself, everything you know you value, that can become like a living hell for you. Up until that point, before I went to China, I was mostly using travel as a way to discover who I was and what my values were, right? And
Hmm.
so then once I knew what those things were, it became possible to experience the opposite of them, to realize that you can see everything you value destroyed in front of you. And that's the dark night of the soul, you at your lowest point, your own personal hell. And I do believe that that's when my suicidal ideation started. I don't think it was part of my life before.
Damn.
Right.
But overall, do you think it was still worthwhile because of what it's taught you about the world and what being human is or
Well, yeah, of course.
isn't, shouldn't be,
I
even though it
believe
brought in your suicidality?
well, okay, so that's kind of a tricky question because it's like you're asking, well, if you had the choice to do it again, would you do it? Of course, I don't have
It
that
is sort of
choice.
like that question.
It happened, right? The thing occurred. I have a choice about how to respond to it now, given that it has happened, right? So I'm doing the best I can with that constraint, right? The fact that I can learn something deep and personal and valuable from it doesn't mean that it was a good thing for it to happen necessarily. It just means I've done a good job of making the most of it. It's the same thing like when I got cheated on. Um, I eventually
But
was
that
able to
bitch,
by that bitch. I was eventually able to learn something rare and valuable from that, but that doesn't mean that like we should praise that girl for cheating on me.
no, of course not. But
She still did a horrible thing.
anti-fragile, right?
Right. It just means that
After the bad thing, you then yourself can use it to be better than before. It still doesn't mean it wasn't a bad thing, like for that person to do.
I have had to become someone who's very good at deriving benefit and growth from negative experiences. With
Part of the
China,
hero's journey.
yeah, that's the whole point of suffering and fighting dragons and eventually emerging victorious. You have to learn something, you have to integrate it into your personality, and you have to grow, transform as a result of it.
Hmm.
And you can't just delude yourself into thinking that life is nothing but rainbows and wonder and joy and curiosity. That's the childish state, the beginning of the adventure. That's Frodo leaving the Shire for the first time, or Bilbo, I'm going on an adventure. Like that's the beginning of the
Naive to the
journey.
point where it's dangerous should you encounter something you haven't yet encountered. You're not ready to encounter things except you have to, and then you have to become ready on the fly, sort of thing.
Yes, you just
Right.
have to deal with it. And because I learned that mentality through my years of travel and adaptation, it's something I carry into everything I do now. I would not have been able to accomplish everything I've done in Armenia with my house here if I didn't have that mentality, because I faced an enormous amount of social and logistical obstacles coming here, doing something I've never done before in a country where I didn't have the connections and the resources really to make that happen. I just had to
And the
keep adapting.
mentality of others is kind of set against it, so you're
Yeah.
on
Yes.
your own, standing out.
There is something either ironic or appropriate about the fact that I ended up settling in a country that has a cultural mentality that is so opposed to transformation and adaptation because that's what I became a specialist in,
Mm.
right?
It's almost like um, really putting your ideas to the test. Are they really that true and powerful? Do they really work that well? Let's see in their
Right.
harshest environment.
Sure. It's not like China. In China, I saw the direct destruction of everything I valued, like personal freedom and thinking for yourself and self-expression and all those things.
Oh, you saw like police doing bad things.
No, no, I just saw a large population of brainwashed people. I've thought about maybe on, like, the 10-year anniversary of this book, which would be 3 years from now, I guess, I'll write
Thought this
a
was 2018. Oh, 2017,
2016. No,
16.
2016, so 2 years from now, Jesus, I'm old. Wow, okay. Um, maybe I will write, like, a new edition with an afterword or something showing how my paradigm has evolved since I wrote this and adopted a more sedentary lifestyle and the advantages and disadvantages of investing yourself in one place over the course of years.
Hmm.
That might be interesting to see because I'm now what I've been doing with my house here in Armenia most recently is taking in international travelers, people who can come
Oh
stay
yeah.
here for free, volunteer, help work on the house or outside, and they get a free place to stay. So basically,
Do you have
people.
like a contractual agreement with them,
No,
or
it's all
is
very
it more
informal.
informal?
Yeah, and there are some problems that have come with that.
Trust.
There have been some interesting people who were not a good fit for being here, and I had to learn to deal with that. That's adaptation, but also a lot of very good people, more good than bad. Some people have been here for months and they really like being here and they help a lot with what we've got going on here. So it's interesting because I'm mostly taking in people who are kind of in the same state of mind and lifestyle that I was in when I wrote this book. And I'm
Hmm.
in a more like advanced stage now where I'm able to host them and give them some stability in their nomadic adaptational journey. I've become like the father to these people, the head of this household. It's been an interesting change in my social role. I don't know. For a long time, is as you know, as everyone who knows me knows, I have been passionate about taking in stray animals for a long time. Even when I was traveling, I took in cats whenever I was in one place long enough to. And I've said for a while, I need to start taking in stray humans. And I couldn't think of how I could do that unless I adopted a child, which is logistically difficult to do, especially when you're single. And so
Oh
far
yeah.
this would be the closest form of taking in stray humans, often people without a place to go. Like, I've had a lot of people from Iran staying here. Iranians have the 10th worst passport in the world in terms of travel freedom. Only countries like
Good lord.
Pakistan and Iraq are behind it, I believe. So they don't have many countries they can go to and stay for very long without a difficult visa process to go through. But among them
Fucking
are
hell.
places like Armenia, Georgia, and Turkey. So I've learned that Iranians who don't want to live under the oppression of their home country will often just kind of nomadically go back and forth between Armenia, Turkey, and Georgia. I didn't know this the whole time I've been living here. I had no idea there was this
A
subclass
is
of
A.
people. But if you're desperate to get away from oppression, you don't want to go back home and you don't have many options for where else to go. What else do you do? So I've had a lot of Iranians, Persians staying at my house and praising what I'm doing, like offering, because there aren't many opportunities like this in Armenia. There are lots in Georgia and Turkey, but Armenia is a very closed-minded country that doesn't have
Ah,
a lot of
interesting.
places like this here. So I'm one of the first here. So because the book is more about transformation than it is about travel, it didn't make sense to me to organize it around the travels, like the age or the country or whatever.
Hmm.
It made more sense to me to categorize it around stages of personal transformation, which for me meant like when I learned certain important things about the travel process and how it was affecting me, which is why I cover like the excitement of the beginning of the adventure first before I get into, and then the
Call
dark
to
night of the soul.
adventure.
Yeah, the call to adventure is chapter number 2? Yeah, I don't even remember. See, I haven't looked at this book in a long time.
Part 2. Call to
Yes.
adventure.
Part 1, The Ordinary World. Part 2, Call to Adventure. Part 3, Departure from the Known. Part 4, Trials and Challenges. Part 5, Approaching the Insurmountable, the Dark Night of the Soul. Right? So there's this progression of psychological development, like advancing from childhood to adulthood. That's how the book is structured, essentially.
Kind of looks like the format of a novel, although um, with part 5 approaching the insurmountable being maybe near the end, and then the rest after that kind of shorter, like the final touches sort of thing.
Well, yeah, so the climax of a fictional story, of a novel or a movie is usually you have to do this impossible thing. You have to have a boss fight. You have to fight someone who's stronger than you. You have to kill the dragon. You have to save the world or
Do
whatever
do
it is,
do
right?
do do do. Zelda.
Ah, okay.
Do, do, do.
And then usually the
That
movie's
Zelda.
over shortly after that. You've rescued the princess and all is well in the world, right? But in real life, it's half the journey, I would say, is reflecting on that. Like, what did you learn from that? How are you going to integrate that into your personality? How are you going to carry that forward into the world now with how you've changed
Hmm.
as a result of that? So that's not the end of the story. That's just a major milestone in the story. That's the biggest part of the transformation of the story. But it continues after that and it never
Because
ends.
yeah, people don't end where novels end. Like a novel ends, a story ends, and that's it. But in real life, at the same point, the person then has the rest of their life to go on with.
And they lived happily ever after. Nothing in their life ever changed after that point. It was a perfect, motionless utopia for all eternity as soon as the camera stopped rolling. As I've said many times, I'm not at all trying to advocate everyone has to travel, everyone has to spend their 20s backpacking around Europe or in an African village or something. No, it definitely takes a certain type of person with certain goals and strengths to totally live travel as a lifestyle like I did. But that being said, virtually everyone would benefit enormously from traveling at least a little bit, just for the
Hmm.
perspective it gives you. The way you grew up in the world and learned to do things is not the only way to do them. You take things for granted when it's all you've ever known, right? And so if you start to see, oh, there are a whole totally different ways of living in the world, maybe some of them better or worse than mine, but whether even if you go back home and you say, the way we do things in America really is just better, at least then you'll have the perspective to make a more informed choice instead of just accepting things by default. I do that with plenty of aspects of American culture now. There's a reason I don't live in America, yet there are certain things that I'm very glad I grew up in America for. So I proudly carry those aspects of American culture with me and try to embody them here in Armenia. That's an informed choice. It's not default. It's not, well, I was born in America. That makes it the greatest country in the world and everyone should do things the way we do. No, it's a choice. It's perspective, it's context, and it's a logical analysis. We do this thing better and people would benefit a lot from this. I've often thought about if I should return to traveling. It's a skill set that I still have. Like I could do it at any time. I know that. Like I know I could pack a suitcase and go fly to a beach in Southeast Asia or something. And that'd be easy.
And maybe only 90% of your stuff would be destroyed when you got back.
And no, I'd do it in such a way that my stuff was secure. Of course, I'd have someone living here or something. But I often, even when I first moved in here, I told myself I will stay here until there is a good reason for me to leave. I
Hmm.
don't wanna just go back to aimlessly traveling just for the sake of traveling because I already satisfied most of that curiosity. I've been 56 countries, that's a little over a quarter of the countries in the world. There's still plenty of the world for me to see, but after a while, it's diminishing returns. It's like, okay, do I need to go to every country in Southeast Asia to feel like I know what Southeast Asia is like, right? Is that curiosity still nagging me? No? Okay. So then what should I be doing? Right? If I'm gonna leave here, it should be because there's a particular place I want to go for a strong reason, which might be an incredible job opportunity, it might be because I fell in love with someone, but it shouldn't just be, well, I'm bored. I'm gonna go back to traveling for a while now. Bye, everyone. Ditch my responsibility or my investment here. Um, and things are always changing and evolving here. I don't know what this place is gonna be like 5 or 10 years from now. Um, so that's part of the interesting now that's the learning process. That's the curiosity. It's like, well, what can I turn this into? How much has it changed since I came here? What else will it continue to change into? It's a depth thing, not a breadth thing. I think if I started traveling again, like I definitely miss some of that excitement, that moving from place to place. I miss tropical fruit like durian and
That
mangoes and
immediately
papayas.
came to mind, I think,
Yeah,
because you
stuff like
mentioned
that.
it on posts and stuff.
Um, I'd be my mind would probably go back to a place of like long-term accumulation because that's how I've gotten used to thinking now. Like it'd be weird for me to be living in someone else's apartment or house long term now because if I'm going to live somewhere, I want to be like shaping it in my image. This house is a reflection of me and my values. Every little design choice, every possession, every piece of furniture I put in here is a reflection of my choices and how I choose
Hmm.
to spend my money and my time and my energy. So, in a very physical, literal sense, this house has been shaped in the image of my values, my choices. And now, with the people who are coming here and the social influence we're trying to have of bringing like more volunteers or people who have nowhere else to go, that's a choice. I'm shaping the society around me, the community around me, by what kind of people I choose to bring in here and how we choose to interact with each other. There's responsibility and power that comes with that that you don't get when you're just yeah, Spider-Man, I know. You don't get that when you're just living out of a backpack and hopping from beach to beach, never leaving a lasting footprint anywhere.
So one thing I say so a lot. So I'm guessing I don't think you talk about it much in the book. People who don't have a bunch of money just to throw around on travel expenses, if they were to decide they wanted to become nomads and spend the next like 5 years of their life traveling to a bunch of countries, they really want to do it, but they ain't got much money. How, if at all?
Well, if you're coming from a first world nation, odds are very good that most of the places you would travel to would actually be cheaper than where you're coming from. I came from California, one of the most expensive places in the world. You're in London still, right?
Not in London.
Oh, well, okay, in the UK, right? So also,
London's actually quite expensive.
yeah, one
So,
of the most expensive places in the world, right? So it's ironic when people think of travel as an expensive thing because they're usually thinking of, a 2-week vacation in Hawaii, all expenses paid and going on tours and scuba diving and so forth, fancy hotels. But 95% of the world or more is much cheaper than what you're accustomed to if you come from a first world nation in a major
but
city.
if you're going all around, in what ways do you or people who would choose to do this continue making money to support this? If you stay in one place and have a job, you are just
Well,
making money
why
to
do you
afford it.
have to
What
stay
about
in
if
one
you're
place to
traveling
have a
every?
job?
Huh?
Why do you need to stay in one place to have a job? It's
I mean,
2000.
it's certainly easier.
I started this in 2007 before the internet and working online were like big, popular, obvious things. Yeah, the internet obviously existed, but it was far less common for people to have online income sources when I started this in 2007.
Would
Now,
that be the main way people would afford this to um like take their laptop and do some kind of remote work, um
that would be the
freelance or
easiest.
something?
Yeah, because if you can take advantage of international arbitrage, if you can be making a wage in a first world country while your living expenses are in a third world one, you can
uh,
live pretty well. Or, yeah, you could set up something locally, but that's generally going to be harder. Or you could just have a lot of money saved up because, again, your money goes a lot further if you're traveling in a developing country.
right.
Most of the time I was traveling, I did not have more than $2,000 in my bank account, I remember.
Damn.
And the biggest expenses were
You
usually
just knew
plane
what to do with
tickets.
it.
Yeah, I spent it while I was very frugal. I found cheap places to stay. If you're not flying very far, like halfway around the world, plane tickets to neighboring countries are generally not that expensive.
Hmm.
And the rest is really just
Bit
food.
annoying. I live on an island if I were going to do that.
Yeah, that could be difficult. But really, you just it's a lifestyle skill, and you can learn a lot from people who've already done this because it's so common to be a digital nomad now. But even before that was popular, people like me were figuring it out from scratch how to make this work. I remember it was a big revelation the first time I learned that there were people like digital nomads because for at least the
Mm.
first 5 years or so that I was traveling, I didn't know it was common for young people to do this in popular tourist destinations, like just live out of a backpack and travel. I was just doing it because I wanted to see the world. I wanted to just go to different places and experience living there. And then I got involved in some of these communities and saw, oh, there's like a whole movement happening around this, right? That wasn't there when I started. It developed somewhere along the way.
What was your source of income or sources of income, if it was multiple?
There have been several along the way. Some of it was savings, some of it was a small inheritance from when my grandmother died before I started. Some English teaching was a very easy way to make money as a native speaker, an American. Mostly I did that in schools in various countries, like that's what I was doing.
In
Right.
person
Yeah.
rather than a digital thing.
Now it's much easier to do that online and you can charge a much higher rate. But at the time I was teaching in shitty local schools, I did a lot of sales and consulting and copywriting work for the longest time because that's the kind of stuff that's really easy to do from a laptop. And that eventually is what turned into writing books and creating passive income
Woo.
sources. And now I help people with book production. That's one of my income sources. So it's a
First
constant.
you were proactive, then you get to be passive income
Yeah.
wise.
It's a constant evolution for me or transformation. I'm always adapting my skills and applying them in new ways in the market to find ways to sustain myself. And now I've pumped a lot of that money I've made again into this physical environment. When you're traveling, everything's very transient. You just pay for things as you need them. Travel expenses, various physical possessions you need with you, experiences in different places, and now it's like all this money is accumulating here in a structure. So again, that's interesting. When I buy a new piece of furniture, it feels like an investment. You don't make those choices when you're living out of a suitcase. You don't buy a couch
Mm.
when you're traveling. And here it's like, yeah, this I feel good about spending a few $100s on this.
If you had to come up with, say, your three most important integrations from your decades of traveling, conceptual integrations about the world, life, yourself, etc., what would they be?
For me, the biggest thing was recognizing the arbitrariness of it all. Everyone has their sacred cows, their sacred cultural cows. Things that they think have to be true about how people live or about who they are. And if you really want to get to the truth of what's unchangeable about you and not just something you inherited from living a certain way in a certain place, I think you need to experience a huge variety of other ways of living. And that's what starts that instigates that questioning process in your mind. Well, if everything I thought had to be true about how people live appears to be wrong, how much of what I believe about myself might also be wrong too? If you have enough experiences, especially really challenging experiences, you see what's still there in spite of all the changes. You see what's firm and what really doesn't change, the principle of you,
Who you are when the world stops telling
who you
you
are when the world stops telling you who to be. Yes, exactly. There's a very strange response to culture that I've never fully understood, which is basically culture as sacrosanct. If something is someone's culture, it must mean it's good and inviolable, and you should respect it and honor it. And that's the way they do things. It's the way their culture tells them to do things. So you have to respect it. And even if it's obviously counterproductive or immoral or just, so many things obviously wrong with it, you, as a forward thinking person who's broken free from the limitations of doing things in a traditional way because that's how you were told to do them, you want to say, well, what if you just changed these things and did it like this? Wouldn't you be much happier? Wouldn't you be much more productive and efficient and logical and peaceful and ethical and all these things that should be universal human virtues? But the majority of people would say, no, it's wrong for you to interfere with the way people culturally do things. It's like the prime directive, to speak of Star Trek
Literally what I
again.
was just about to say.
Most people, 99% of people will tell you, you gotta respect the prime directive above all. Do not interfere with primitive cultures, people less developed than you. And I'd say fuck all that noise. I'd say my goal,
I'd say fuck all that noise.
one of my
This is
immutable
why I nicknamed you Mr. Break Free of the Limits of Culture,
is that oh yeah, that is my
your
nickname.
messenger
Yeah.
nickname.
One of my core defining values is educating people about the truth of how things work, and especially useful knowledge. So that means that sometimes you're going to introduce people to information that is not part of their default cultural settings. Default. Default.
Your brain did a default there.
Yeah, I
A
just had a
default brain fart.
brain defart there. Things that are not part of your default worldview. That's all culture is. Culture is your unconscious set of expectations for how things are supposed to work. And yes, it can be very uncomfortable to question that or confront that things don't necessarily work the way you unconsciously expect them to. That's part of why people are so defensive of culture. It's like, well, don't make people too existentially uncomfortable by confronting them with things they're not ready for. And that's part of the reasoning behind the Prime Directive in Star Trek, too. It's like we don't want to contaminate their mindsets with information they're not ready for, right? Even if that information would make their lives significantly better and stop unnecessary wars and poverty and all these horrible things that, of course, no one wants, right?
One thing about how you said people view it, I'm not sure it's that they see culture as good inherently per se, but as um, a metaphysical baseline. So it's not good; it's deeper than that. In a sense, it's part of the just is what just is about how someone
Hmm.
is, like someone from a culture. That's part of what just is about them. So it's neither good nor bad. It's like
It's how they
just
identify.
fundamental and absolute, and
It's
not just like people about perhaps about their own culture for themselves, but also about, so like cultural relativism about anyone else's culture for the people, let's say, under that culture. It's like, well, this is absolute. You're not allowed to like suggest that it could be corrected. It's a it's a given.
yeah. It's as much a given as the laws of physics to these people. And that's where that existential terror comes in when you question an absolute. Even if that absolute is something totally arbitrary and stupid, it's like, well, this is what I formed my sense of who I am on. So if you take that away, I fall into a pit of despair. And how dare you force me to confront the absurdity of what I've accepted as true and what I will teach my children is true because I need them to believe the same things I believe. Otherwise, I feel threatened by it. Even if it means my children will suffer significantly more through life and be very limited because I forced them to believe certain things. And again, my response to that is simply fuck that noise. No, you can't force me to respect things that are not worthy of respect. I respect the truth. I respect growth and virtue and education and empowerment and all those things that require us to question the way things are done and to improve them if we recognize they could be done better. Even now, I find myself having to remind myself if I get too caught up in like the Armenian worldview, the Armenian way of seeing things or doing things, even though I'm very explicitly an agent of change here who is
Or a way of
countercultural.
not seeing things in some cases, as suggested in
Selective
a lot of your
ignorance.
posts.
Yeah. I have to remind myself not to get too caught up in the Armenian worldview. Even as
Hmm.
experienced as I am, even as broad as my perspective is, because I've been here 5 years now and I'm very intimately involved in many Armenian lives and issues, I have to remind myself this is just one arbitrary way of living. There is nothing special about this place, right? It's just where I happen to be and where I happen to be most influenced at the moment. But at any moment, I could get on a plane to the other side of the world and I'd be influenced by completely different ways of thinking and living. I have to consciously maintain that perspective because I still sometimes fall into the trap of thinking that whatever is happening around me is what's most real or most important. That's part of that universal
Like the water a
arbitrariness.
fish is in.
Yeah, what is water, says the fish. The localization bias or the proximity bias, I forget the term for it, but just because something is happening to you or around you or you're exposed to it more doesn't make it more real, more true, or more important. It's a selection bias. And so I maintain that perspective as much as I can consciously that all of this could change in a moment. I could be in any other country right now and I'd be thinking about different things and confronted with different issues. People who only live with one culture in one place their whole lives can't really do that. They can't see how arbitrary and fleeting and ephemeral everything they think is important is.
Unless they are deep thinkers who can see past it, see outside of the water.
Yeah, I suppose the Buddhists were probably like the first people in history to really own this way of looking at life. Because you have to remember, too, it wasn't really technologically possible to travel very far for most of human history. Most people were walking everywhere most of the time, or riding on a horse and occasionally on a
Or not
boat.
very far, very fast. Like you could go on a ship from
Yeah,
whenever
it took
exactly that
months,
was, like
right?
what, 14th century or something? 15th.
So
But yeah.
you couldn't have the type of global perspective, at least in the literal direct sense that I'm talking now, until fairly recently in human society, because we had the technology to make it easier to travel further distances and directly experience different cultures. But you could still from a philosophical or psychological or spiritual perspective, you could spend all day meditating and questioning every little thing you think is true and realize how fake and meaningless and arbitrary it all is, right? So what I know about the history of certain religions or philosophies like Buddhism, that's essentially what they were trying to do. Like, how do I break free of my human identity, of the person the world told me to be? And if you couldn't, I used travel as the catalyst for doing that. But if you didn't have travel as an option, how would you do that? Deep inquiry, basically. Deep, deep philosophical inquiry, maybe meditation, maybe
To get a
resting in a
actual
mountain
truth
somewhere.
as opposed to if you're just some generic person of a culture, then um, like you probably have a ton of ideas you implicitly accept that are just garbage.
Right. And how do you get rid of those things? I think there's a reason the trope of the spiritual mystic who lives disconnected from society on a mountain somewhere exists, because that's a person who wants to have as little external influence as possible. They want to be free to focus internally on who they are or want to be or what is really fundamentally true.
Which I don't think makes for a good life if that's all you do, but it could be a worthwhile some number of years,
I
maybe.
think there's a balance to it, and in a way, I kind of inadvertently found that balance by moving into an isolated Armenian village because I'm
Mm.
not literally alone on a mountaintop with no one around. There are
And if
people.
you break your leg, you die.
Yeah, I do have access to modern technology. There's about 150 people in this village, but we're an hour from town. So it's a bit inconvenient to get here. So only people who really want to come here come here. And I am largely free from Armenian cultural influence, especially compared to like if I lived in the capital, Yerevan, I'd be very heavily
Inconvenience
influenced.
produces selectivity there, then,
Yeah,
if it's a bit away to get
it's
there
heat keeping.
from.
Yeah, so it'd be really hard for me to go back to like being surrounded by people and being forced to share their concerns and their activities and their pastimes instead of just being free to make those choices myself. I chose
Hmm.
a fairly isolated lifestyle for a reason because I wanted to be free to live the kind of life I wanted with minimal interference.
Mr. Diehl, Gregory, part 10, your final chapter before the epilogue is shape the future, owning your influence. So this seems like your sort of kind of condensation, not quite that, but kind of final touches to the book, sort of wrapping everything up. Um, like here's what you get from travel, all the rest of the book, and then here's going on into the future, sort of thing. What would you like to say about the conclusion
Yeah,
to the book?
it's about taking it beyond just how you have changed as a result of your experience traveling. It's about taking responsibility for then how you influence other people, affect other people. You become part of their transformation if you do this consciously and responsibly. And that can take on an infinite number of forms. I'm, of course, always trying to consciously influence and transform people either at a distance through things like my books. Maybe these videos will have a positive influence on someone, but also directly, physically, what I can do with the extent of my direct influence where I am in my house. I don't know what else there is to do except that once you have become a transformed person and you have a good sense of who you are, do you just keep trying to learn and transform and grow? I've known a lot of people, even into their old age, it's like they were in perpetual student mode, perpetual Bilbo going on an adventure mode. Children at
Good thing.
no, I'm saying it as a criticism. Like there is a certain cuteness to that, I guess, like young at heart, but it's like they weren't ready to ever evolve past that and take on the role of being a teacher and influencer to others. They just wanted to
Was
constantly be learning and growing and transforming.
was the problem that they weren't also doing the other things? Because surely you do always want to be learning and growing and transforming. But then was the problem not just that that's all they were doing?
Yeah.
Like,
There was
right.
no solidity. You need that solidity. You need the rigidity to make a choice and stick to it. To not just be flowing like water all the time. Sometimes you gotta be earth, and be a rock in the path of a boulder that refuses to move, a Snorlax that won't wake up.
The two, water and earth, the two that we're not.
Well, I'm very earthy. I'm airy and earthy, I would think. But and this the air nomads or nomads, right? Constantly floating from place to place. And now I've settled in one place and I've become like a rock here, really firmly planting my feet, putting down roots. So that's, opposite sides of the spectrum, each with its own advantage and influence. So it's a book about growing up more than anything. How do you grow up? How do you mature into the person you're supposed to be? How do you discover who that is and then spend the rest of your life being that person? That's what the book is about. Travel is a pretty good catalyst for that. I definitely don't think everyone should be a nomad and a constant traveler, but everyone could certainly benefit from doing at least a little bit of non-conventional travel, not vacation travel, not easy travel, but challenging
Hmm.
yourself with travel. That I highly endorse for everyone.
Maturing in the full sense rather than in the like lame typical sense people seem to regard it as. Maturing being like giving up aspects of who you are to fit better into the world.
No, it's the opposite of that. If
Yeah,
anything,
that's what I mean. I'm
yeah, what you're
saying,
doing is changing the world to be more like you rather than changing
yeah,
yourself
I'm
to change
saying
the world.
as opposed to that,
Yeah,
a more full version of maturing where you remain integrated, you become
yeah.
more of yourself rather than giving up parts of yourself.
One of my least favorite phrases is the real world because
Oh yeah,
usually people mean the exact opposite of the real world when they say the real world. They mean
they mean
my
the static
illusions.
world.
They mean my subjective interpretation of what's important and how reality works.
That's part of it. Also, it's that whole sort of go along to get along mentality
Yeah.
where if you went along with the real world, you might very well survive into your old age and just simply die of old age. Like if you consider that mission accomplished, then if that is mission accomplished, I don't think it is, then sure, that's they know what's up. But I like I don't think that's sufficient for uh I'm just gonna be cruel to all the people who disagree here, a valid human life. That's not what you want to be fucking doing with your life, going along, what was it? Going along to get, I forget the exact thing, but
Yeah.
going with what everyone else
Going with the
perceives,
flow.
judges, yeah, judges to be the acceptable thing. The Overton window, yeah, people um, of the kind you mentioned, the real world people, the people who use that phrase um, in the way you're talking about, they mean don't go too far outside of the expected norms of how to be as a human, even if that's better, or they can't consider that it could be better. It's there is no That's not a valid concept to them being better than what's done, what's within the valid bounds.